I look back on my career, I think the most consequential decision I've ever been involved in was the decision to let the president, being elected last year, pick the Supreme Court nominee. Of course, my colleagues back me up. The American people spoke, and today we will confirm the nominee the new president has selected. I think, as we all know, this is a person of extraordinary credentials who will bring honor to the Supreme Court for many, many years to come. So it is indeed a proud day. I also want to express my support for the strike that the president made last night against Assad's chemical weapons facility. I think that the strike was well planned, well executed, was certainly more than a pinprick, and sends a message not only to Assad that using chemical weapons again is something he cannot do with impunity, but I think it also reassures our Sunni Arab allies that America is back in terms of playing a leadership role and trying to be constructive in a variety of different places around the world, as well as a message to Iran and North Korea and the Russians that America intends to lead again. So I commend the president for this decision. I think it's entirely correct. One other observation I would make as we move beyond the Supreme Court, the Democratic leader and I had a good meeting this week to discuss the way forward. The spending bill to fund the government through September 30th obviously is one that cannot be done by one party alone. It will require, as is the Senate's tradition, bipartisan involvement. The appropriations committees have been working together on a bipartisan basis to come up with a package. And of course, the Democratic leader will be in a role similar to the one I was in during the Obama years. These kind of bills can't pass without a reasonable number of the party of the minority in the Senate, and we are optimistic we'll be able to work all that out and meet the deadline at the end of the month. With that, let me just throw it open.
Yeah. You've spoken in support of the president's actions yesterday. In your mind, what is the legal and constitutional authority that sort of underpins that? And do you have any concerns about him using that authority however he may in the future?
I think the president had the authority to do what he did, and I'm glad he did it.
Mr. Williams, to that end, though, John McCain, Tim McCain, senators from both sides of the aisle have called for an AUMF of some sort. As you know, we've talked about this since 2011. Would you be in support, if we're going to have issues with Syria, you said you want to send messages to these other nations as well, to have some sort of a robust debate on these offers?
Well, I'd be interested in taking a look at an AUMF if the president feels like he needs it. President Obama, I don't think, ever specifically asked for an AUMF either.
He sent two.
Yeah, but they were so restrictive that most of my members felt that it would be, to pass that would sort of be to micromanage future executive branch activity in the area. So if the president can think of some AUMF that he thinks that strengthens his hand, I'd be happy to take a look at it.
Senator, you have opposed military intervention in Syria in the past, as recently as 2013. What makes last night different, and why do you support it?
Yeah, let me tell you the difference. Secretary Kerry, I guess in order to reassure the left-leaning members of his own party, said it would sort of be like a pinprick. You know, it really would not be of any great consequence. I don't know whether he had in mind knocking out a tent and a couple of camels or what. But this was a strike that was well planned, well executed, went right to the heart of the matter, which is using chemical weapons. So had I seen that kind of approach by President Obama, I'm sure I would have signed up.
Do you believe we're at the point now where the U.S. policy should be Assad's removal in Syria?
I think this strike was simply about don't use chemical weapons again. That's what this strike was about. So I don't think it necessarily leads to another conclusion. But look, I don't see how there can possibly be any settlement in Syria that includes Bashar al-Assad. I just can't imagine, after all the butchering of his own people he's been doing now for 4 or 5 years, that there could be any successful conclusion to this chaos with him still there.
Senator McConnell, Dr. Bob Corker yesterday said he would support additional sanctions on Russia, which, as you know, is undergirding the Assad regime. Would you consider purging the president on that particular issue if Putin continues to help Assad and beef up his air defenses against future attacks?
Well, I think it's certainly good that the administration has not lifted any of the existing sanctions. And if they feel they need additional sanctions, or we can come up with something that seems to enjoy bipartisan support, I'd be open to it. The Russians are not our friends. I think they've demonstrated that over and over and over again. So I'd certainly be willing to talk to Chairman Corker and anyone else that thinks we may need to go beyond where we are.
Mr.
Sir?
First off, has the White House asked for anything in the spending bill that you feel would jeopardize its ability to pass here in the Senate? And two, have you talked to Mitt Romney about running for Senate in Utah?
On the first question, you all know how I really don't like to negotiate these deals with guys. All of those items are under discussion between the White House and the Democratic leader in the Senate and the four corners on the committee. I can't specify how it all plays out. Yeah, I've had some conversations with Mitt Romney. Obviously, I'm an Orrin Hatch supporter, and Orrin has to decide what he wants to do. If he wants to run again, I'm for him.
Sir?
Sir, can you describe? Given that the president's...
I'll get to you in a minute, yeah.
Sir, can you talk about your interaction with the president and the administration on Syria? Are you satisfied with the interaction between the administration?
I am. The vice president called me last night. Excuse me. Explained the rationale, how they were doing it, and I thought it made a lot of sense, and would be a strike that would be noticed, not some kind of pinprick, and be directly related to the reason the Tomahawks were sent in the first place, the use of chemical weapons. So I very much approve of what the president did. I think it was not only an important message to Assad, but to everybody else who may be wondering just what this new administration is going to be like. If I were one of our Sunni Arab allies watching this, I'd be encouraged that America was back in the business of being more assertive, less passive. That does not mean you're going to send in the troops every time there's a skirmish somewhere, but I thought it was very reassuring. Yeah.
Given that President Trump was spurred to action in part because of some of the images that he saw of families, young children being killed by these chemical weapons, do you think he should reevaluate his policy towards refugees from that region, given that a lot of them are children?
Yeah, I'm not going to give him any advice about that. America has always stepped up in these refugee situations. How many people we take is always under discussion. But obviously the refugees are not going to quit coming until the war stops. And one of the things that I think both Democrats and Republicans have said we ought to take a look at over the years is to create some safe zones, which would require some military action, but to create some safe zones inside Syria so people don't feel like they have to run for their lives. We already have an enormous number of people in Jordan and in Turkey, and of course many people have made it into Europe, having all kinds of destabilizing impact on Europe. We need to stop the refugee flow if we possibly can, and that's something I've heard people on both sides talk about a good bit.
Leader McConnell.
Yeah.
Did you get any signal yesterday from the White House about what comes next? Will there be more military action, or did you get the sense that this was...
No, I think this strike was related to the use of chemical weapons only. So I don't interpret this as the first step toward anything else in particular other than trying to eliminate, or at least to make sure that he knows there are consequences for doing this again.
You mentioned this big spending bill is something you need to work, and the president needs to work with Democrats on. Some of the other items that we need them on are kind of a ways off. Is there anything in the near term on the Senate's legislative agenda that's going to involve a lot of Democratic support?
Yeah, I mean, all the appropriation bills, all of them. I mean, none of these can be done one party only. And as soon as we finish funding the government through September 30th, we're already into the 2018 appropriation cycle. All of that will have to be done on a bipartisan basis, and I fully intend, and I think the Democratic leader can speak for himself, but I'm confident he looks at it the same way.
Anything beyond just spending bills?
Sure, there'll be other bills. Yeah. Well, I'll announce them when we get to them.
Just a quick, I'll jump back to the 2018. After going through what you said, just went through with the filibuster and so on and so forth, and the NRSC just reported they had a very good fundraising month. How do you look at the prospects of perhaps getting at least 8 seats right?
This is April of 2017, and you're asking me to predict what will happen in the fall of 2018. I decline the opportunity. I would certainly hope we could hold the Senate, and that's certainly going to be our goal. Yeah, Neil.
On politics as well, have you had any conversations with the president, or do you plan to have any conversations with the president about the importance of not challenging incumbent Republicans and picking the most electable candidates?
I don't think that's going to be a problem. As you all know, if you follow politics around here, we intend to renominate all of our incumbents, and we intend to play in primaries if there's a clear choice between someone who can win in November and someone who can't. The idea, I always remind people, is to win the election. And frequently the primary in 2010 and 2012 dictated the outcome in November. We didn't let that happen again in 2014. We came to the majority. We only had one episode in 2016 in Indiana. We nominated the right candidate and he won. So I think it's safe to say that we will be looking for, in these non-incumbent races, the most electable candidate possible. And I think the administration will defer to our judgment on Senate races. Yeah.
Given what happened with the repeal and replace effort in the House, is there any consideration on tax reform to perhaps not using the reconciliation process and taking a more bipartisan approach?
Well, here's the problem. I had just gotten here when we did tax reform 30 years ago. And here was the situation. There was a Democratic House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president. We had a bipartisan agreement it would be revenue neutral with the government. The leader of the Democrats on the issue was Bill Bradley, not exactly a right-winger. A very different environment. Today's Democratic Party, it seems to me, believes that tax reform is about income redistribution. How much can we get out of successful people in order to push down to those who've been less successful? That's not about growing the economy. And so I would love to be able to do tax reform on a bipartisan basis, but I think most of the Democrats today believe tax reform is a tax hike. And tax reform is about making America more competitive. We didn't have a single year of 3% growth during the Obama years. We're not going to be able to realize opportunities for the next generation unless we get the country growing again. So I expect we'll be left with the reconciliation device because of essential lack of interest on the Democratic side in trying to get us going again. The two things that will get us going again, one is regulatory relief, and we've done 11 CRAs already. We hope to do a few more before the time runs out. The administration is trying on its own to curb, delay, or stop some of the most egregious regulations that have slowed the economy down. If we can succeed in serious regulatory reform and get a more rational tax code, we can get this country growing again, which will provide more jobs and opportunity for everybody. I'd love for the Democrats to be a part of that. I don't think they look at this the same way we do, as a jobs issue. And so I'm not anticipating their cooperation.
Mr. McConnell?
Yeah.
Once more on Syria. You did speak to the Vice President last night. Senators from both parties have asked for an explanation from the administration of what is the president's strategy here after the military strikes. Do you have any indication from the administration of what is the broader Syria strategy at this point? And then secondly, I just wanted to follow up on the health care question.
Really, I don't know why anybody's confused. I thought it was very clear what this strike was about. You don't use chemical weapons without consequences. I think that's a pretty clear message. And I don't necessarily read into that a larger strategy in the area, but they certainly want to try to prevent the mass killing of innocent people by the use of chemical weapons. I thought it was a very clear way to send a message.
And so you don't expect any further?
I don't know what we'll hear from them
and then I just
beyond that.
Follow up on Obamacare and the attempts to repeal and replace. Do you have any sense that that is something that during the next work period could be taken up? Do you have any sense that the amendments that the House proposed yesterday are something that could get moving over here?
What was the initial question again?
Obamacare.
Look, obviously this is pretty hard to do. And if the House is able to send something over to us, we'll take it up. And it'll be hard here as well. But the initial effort will be in the House, and I'm hoping that they can be successful and get something over to us.
Mr. Leader, is the White House working with Democrats on a spending bill?
Yeah.
So, because Senator Schumer seemed to suggest otherwise, that he's not been in communication with the White House.
Oh, really? I thought, maybe I'm mistaken. I thought they were talking to each other. I know he and Director Mulvaney met this week. And
it was a meet and greet, not a policy.
Okay, well, I'm not going to argue about that. That's up to him to answer that question. I thought they were in communication. Yeah.
I was wondering, you said this is one of the most consequential decisions you've made to keep this seat open for the past year. The current president to decide who's going to be on the Supreme Court. What do you think the ensuing debates impact is going to be on both the functionality of the Senate and the perception of the impartiality of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to remember, as you all heard me say over and over and over again, the business of filibustering executive branch appointments is a recent thing, invented, ironically, by the current Democratic leader of the Senate. I hope you all did at least listen to the facts. There's a lot of spin out here, but the facts are that the Democratic leader of the Senate invented filibustering judges. Where we are is back where we were as late as 2000, where executive branch appointments to cabinet positions, sub-cabinet positions, and court positions are dealt with a simple majority vote. The core of the Senate is the legislative filibuster. This business of filibustering judges was a creation of Senator Schumer when George Bush 43 got elected. Not a long-standing tradition of the Senate. The practical result of where we are now is we're back to where we were as late as 2000. And the best test of that would have been the Clarence Thomas nomination in 1991. Nobody would argue that was the most controversial Supreme Court nomination ever. You all know all it takes to get 60 votes in the Senate is one senator out of 100 to say, I want you to get 60 votes. Nobody did. That's a pretty strongly held custom. And that's the way the Senate operated until 2000. This notion that this somehow bleeds over into the legislative filibuster is untrue. I'm opposed to it. Senator Collins, as you know, is circulating a letter to Senator Schumer and myself of members who support the legislative filibuster. I would be the beneficiary, and my party would be the beneficiary of changing that. I'm opposed to changing it. I think that's what fundamentally changes the Senate. Republicans have always felt that way. I'll give you an example from ancient history. 1994, big Republican sweep. took the House for the first time in 40 years, got the Senate back. Tom Harkin, who used to be here, was always in favor of turning the Senate into the House. And on day one, he proposed a rules change to lower the threshold for everything to a simple majority. And every single member of the new, just elected, new Republican majority voted no. And they would have been, obviously, the beneficiaries of that. So it is not true that the executive calendar and how we handle that is the core of the way the Senate operates. The legislative filibuster is. I don't favor getting rid of that, even though we would have a short-term benefit from that. I'm optimistic that Senator Collins will get a lot of people signing the letter to the Democratic leader and myself having a similar view.
What do you say to Democrats who think you've stolen a seat?
Senator McConnell, following up on that, given the Democratic actions we've seen on the floor this week, do you think many have suggested it's really just gearing up for the next time a seat opens up that could change the ideological balance? Do you think that's true?
I don't know. We don't have another seat right now. What I'd like to see after the recess is us, get back to some semblance of normalcy. I mean, you've watched the all-night sessions on cabinet appointments and a lot of other things that I think are pretty obvious a response to the core base of the Democratic Party, which is still really in deep depression over the outcome of the election. And I think it's time to move past that. I hope a lot of the Democrats who've been telling me privately they want to move past that will be able to do that publicly when we get back. And we'll have an opportunity to do it on the spending bill as soon as we get back. Yeah.
McConnell, you said that the Syria conflict can't be resolved with Assad still in power, and you'd also suggested you're open to creating safe zones. So does it concern you that that there doesn't appear to be a what's next from the White House?
I think there's no easy answer to what's next. What I do think we're going to succeed in doing, which the previous administration started, and I think this administration is going to finish, which is to get ISIL out of Iraq. And the effort in western Mosul is underway. It's bloody and difficult, but I think that will succeed. Secondly, I think Secretary Mattis has indicated he's going to recommend a residual force stay behind in Iraq. There's a lot of finger pointing about who was responsible for leaving entirely in the early years of the Obama administration. The Obama administration said the Iraqis wanted us to go. A lot of the Iraqis said, no, we didn't. But regardless of whose idea it was for us to completely withdraw from Iraq, it was a bad idea. We needed a residual force left behind like we did in Germany and Japan and Korea. And President Obama, to his credit, left a residual force behind in Afghanistan. I think those units help guarantee that you don't have to sort of fight the war all over again. Yeah.
You announced there's a briefing today for the Senate this afternoon, but are there any considerations to come back during recess to debate authorization?
To debate what?
To debate authorization for Syria. Are there any conversations about that?
No. Okay, one more and we're out.
With the vote on Gorsuch today, you will be single-handedly responsible for the one major legislative victory by the Trump administration so far. So I'm curious what evidence you can point to that this administration knows how to achieve legislative outcomes on the Hill.
Well, I happen to think the congressional reviews that we've been doing are significant. They're going to save the economy billions of dollars, and when we finish doing them, we're hoping to entice all of you into finally writing a story about how much relief for the economy has occurred as a result of repealing these regulations. But look, we're just in the first quarter of the year. There's much left to be done, and I'm optimistic we're going to be able to accomplish a lot for the American people. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.